15 Black R&B legends who lost everything to plastic surgery. What if the women who gave you the greatest music of your life were slowly destroyed by the same industry that made them famous? 18 Grammys, 100 million records, voices that defined generations. And behind every single one of them, a story the headlines never told you. Tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on 15 Black R&B legends whose journeys through fame, beauty standards, and brutal industry pressure left marks that went far deeper than any photograph ever showed. Some altered their faces, some were altered by illness, and at least one never had a single procedure but paid the ultimate price anyway. You will not see these women the same way after this. If the truth matters to you, subscribe to Hidden Celebrity Stories right now, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments, which of these legends do you think suffered the most? Aretha Franklin. 18 Grammy Awards, 75 million records sold across 5 decades. A voice that could reduce a room to silence, and then rebuild it, note by note, into something resembling faith. 18 Grammy Awards, 75 million records sold. The first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. Aretha Franklin didn't perform music, she testified. From Respect in 1967 to Chain of Fools, from You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman to her final public performance in 2017, every note carried the full weight of a life lived without apology. But power does not protect you from being watched. As Aretha's body changed visibly in her later years, weight fluctuations, shifts in her facial structure, tabloids reached for the easiest explanation. Cosmetic surgery became the default assumption. The reality was categorically different. In 2010, Aretha underwent surgery to remove a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, a serious, life-altering procedure with lasting effects on her metabolism and physical appearance. The changes people observed afterward were not the result of botched procedures or unchecked vanity. They were the marks of a body managing cancer's aftermath while its owner continued, stubbornly, magnificently, to show up. Her 2015 performance at the Kennedy Center Honors, singing for President Obama, produced one of the most widely shared emotional moments in televised music history. Not the performance of a woman diminished, the performance of a woman who had survived everything and still had more to give than most artists will ever possess. She passed away on August 16, 2018, surrounded by family in Detroit, the city that first heard her voice and understood immediately that something extraordinary had arrived. What the world lost that day was not an image. It was a standard no one else will ever fully meet. Tina Turner. More than 100 million records sold. A comeback at 44 that shattered every assumption about second acts in the music industry. A 2,000 concert tour that became the highest-grossing North American tour of that year, performed by a woman in her 60s, in heels, for 3 hours a night. Tina Turner did not simply survive, she set records while doing it. Yes, she had surgery on her nose. She confirmed this directly in a 2005 conversation with Oprah Winfrey, and the context could not be more important. Ike Turner broke her nose multiple times. The procedure was reconstructive, medically necessary, performed to repair cartilage damaged by years of documented domestic violence. She also reportedly underwent a facelift and breast implants later in life, decisions she addressed with the same unflinching directness she brought to everything. "I'm afraid I might end up not looking like myself," she told Oprah. That single sentence reveals more self-possession than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. What shaped her appearance in the final years had nothing to do with cosmetic choices. In 2013, 3 months into her marriage to Erwin Bach, she suffered a stroke. In 2016, she was diagnosed with intestinal cancer. In 2017, kidney failure led to a transplant. The donor was her husband, who gave literally part of himself so she could continue living. She passed away on May 24, 2023, at her home in Küsnacht, Switzerland, at 83. The transformation that defined Tina Turner was never captured in a before and after photograph. It happened in the space between a woman trapped inside a violent marriage with nothing, and the global icon who walked out of that marriage with only her stage name and built an empire from it. No surgeon made that happen. She did. Diana Ross. Long before the entertainment industry developed a language for personal branding, Diana Ross had already mastered it, instinctively, completely, and without a single consultant. As the lead voice of the Supremes, she stood at the center of one of the most commercially dominant acts in American music history. 12 #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, 5 of them consecutive, a feat no American group had ever achieved. Her 1970s solo debut produced Ain't No Mountain High Enough, which reached #1 immediately. By 1993, the Guinness World Records had named her the most successful female music artist in history. The Presidential Medal of Freedom followed in 2016, awarded personally by President Barack Obama. For decades, Diana's image was as carefully architected as her music catalog. So when her appearance began to evolve, as every human face does across 8 decades of living, public commentary arrived without invitation. Has she had cosmetic work? Possibly. Probably to some degree, as is extraordinarily common among performers of her generation and visibility. What is conspicuously absent from every headline is a single shred of evidence that any procedure damaged her career, compromised her voice, or cost her the respect she had spent 60 years earning. What the conversation around Diana Ross actually exposes is not a cautionary tale. It is a double standard, the same one applied to virtually every woman in entertainment who dares to age in public, where natural change is called suspicious and graceful evolution is treated as evidence of something to be ashamed of. At 82, Diana Ross still performs internationally. Her voice still commands rooms. Her legacy still shapes every female artist who followed her through the door she refused to wait for permission to open. She did not lose herself. She outlasted almost everyone who tried to define her. Gladys Knight. The title came with the territory. Empress of Soul. 4 words that sit comfortably on Gladys Knight because she spent 6 decades earning every syllable. Midnight Train to Georgia reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973 and won the Grammy for Best R&B Song the following year. Neither One of Us Wants to Be the First to Say Goodbye preceded it, climbing to #2 and establishing her as one of the defining voices of her era before most of her peers had found their footing. By the time she transitioned into gospel music in the 1990s, she had accumulated a catalog that spanned soul, R&B, and pop, all of it rooted in a vocal authenticity that trends could not touch. Over the years, the usual speculation followed, mild rumors about cosmetic enhancements circulating at the edges of her public narrative, as they do for virtually every woman who remains visible past 50. No credible evidence has ever emerged to support those rumors in any meaningful way. No confirmed procedures, no documented interventions, nothing beyond the ambient noise that follows Black women in entertainment who refuse to disappear gracefully. What Gladys Knight chose instead, and this deserves recognition as a genuine act of artistic courage, was to age in full view, without apology or explanation. She moved into gospel music not as a retreat, but as an arrival, aligning her voice with something she had always believed in and finally had the freedom to pursue completely. At 81, she continues to perform. Her voice retains its warmth and its authority. Her story offers no dramatic cautionary lesson about cosmetic excess, because there is no such story to tell. What it offers instead is something rarer. An example of a woman who knew exactly who she was and simply kept being that person. Natalie Cole. The weight of a legendary name can crush a person. Natalie Cole carried her father's name, Nat King Cole, one of the most beloved voices in American music history, and rather than disappear beneath it, she built something that stood entirely apart. This Will Be an Everlasting Love announced her arrival in 1975 with a Grammy for Best New Artist and Best R&B Vocal Performance. Inseparable followed. Then Our Love and I've Got Love on My Mind, a string of R&B chart dominance that established her as a force in her own right, not a footnote in someone else's legacy. The 1991 album Unforgettable with Love, in which she sang duets with archived recordings of her late father, sold over 7 million copies worldwide and swept the 1992 Grammy Awards with 7 wins, including Album of the Year and Record of the Year. Behind that success, however, ran a story most audiences never fully understood. Natalie battled heroin addiction through the early 1980s, a chapter she discussed publicly and without deflection. The addiction led to hepatitis C, diagnosed years later, which eventually caused kidney failure requiring dialysis. The visible physical changes that observers repeatedly and carelessly linked to cosmetic surgery were, in documented medical reality, the effects of serious illness and the treatments required to survive it. She passed away on December 31, 2015 in Los Angeles at 65 from complications of congestive heart failure. Natalie Cole's story is not about vanity or surgical excess. It is about a woman who overcame addiction, outlasted her own health crises, recorded music of extraordinary beauty in the years she had remaining, and demonstrated that strength is not the absence of suffering. It is what you do while suffering is present. Minnie Riperton. There are singers with remarkable ranges, and then there is Minnie Riperton, a category of one. A verified 5-octave vocal range, including a whistle register that floated above the staff in a register most trained singers cannot access at all, let alone control. Her technical ability was extraordinary by any objective musical standard. And yet, what made Minnie Riperton unforgettable was not the range itself. It was the intimacy she brought to it. Notes that should have felt clinical and acrobatic felt instead like something whispered in a quiet room. Lovin' You, released in January 1975, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the most recognizable recordings of its decade. She co-wrote it with her husband, Richard Rudolph, and the song carried in its delicate structure the full warmth of their relationship. She was 28 years old when it topped the chart. The world was only beginning to understand what she was capable of producing. 12 months later, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. At a moment in American cultural life when celebrities rarely, if ever, disclosed serious illness publicly, Minnie chose complete transparency. She became a national spokesperson for the American Cancer Society, using whatever platform she had to advocate for early detection and open conversation at a time when both were considered radical. Changes in her physical appearance during those final years were documented and real, and entirely attributable to the disease and its treatment, not to any cosmetic intervention of any kind. She passed away on July 12, 1979. She was 31. In the context of this list, Minnie Riperton stands apart, not as a cautionary tale about appearance, but as a reminder of what actually deserves to be remembered: the courage, the music, and the 31 years that somehow contained a lifetime. Mary Wilson. History tends to remember the name in the center of the marquee, but anyone who genuinely knows the architecture of the Supremes understands that Mary Wilson was never a background figure. She was the foundation on which everything else was built. 12 #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100. A presence in the group from its earliest formation in Detroit's Brewster Douglas housing projects as the Primettes, through the peak of Motown's commercial dominance, through the final decades of touring and advocacy. While Diana Ross became a solo phenomenon and Florence Ballard's story became a tragedy, Mary Wilson became something arguably more difficult to sustain. The keeper of the group's complete history, determined that no version of the story would erase the names that belonged in it. Her two memoirs, Dreamgirl, My Life as a Supreme, and Supreme Faith, stand as primary historical documents. She gave interviews, appeared in documentaries, and filed legal actions when necessary to ensure that the Supremes' legacy was represented with full accuracy. As she aged in the public eye, observers noted changes in her skin and features and reached the conclusion the entertainment media almost always reaches. No confirmed evidence ever emerged that plastic surgery played a defining role in her appearance or her story. What is confirmed and significant is this: in the final days of her life, Mary Wilson posted a video online discussing new music and upcoming creative projects, visibly energized, forward-facing, anything but diminished. She passed away suddenly on February 8, 2021, at 76, from hypertensive cardiovascular disease. There was no long decline, no cautionary ending. She was still building something the morning she died, and that fact tells you more about Mary Wilson than any conversation about her appearance ever could. LaToya Jackson. Of all 15 names on this list, LaToya Jackson is the one where documentation replaces speculation. Early photographs from the late 1970s and early 1980s show a woman with naturally wider nasal features, softer cheekbones, and a rounded jawline entirely consistent with her family's shared genetic characteristics. Photographs from the 2000s onward present a dramatically different picture: an extremely narrow, sculpted nose, highly elevated cheekbones, a sharply pointed chin, and skin with the taut, uniformly smooth quality associated with multiple facelifts. Multiple board-certified plastic surgeons who have publicly analyzed her photographs identify repeated rhinoplasty as the most evident intervention, alongside probable cheek implants, chin augmentation, and blepharoplasty. LaToya herself has maintained over the years that her appearance is largely natural, a position the visual record makes extraordinarily difficult to sustain. Context, however, matters as much as documentation. LaToya grew up inside the Jackson family, an environment shaped from childhood by a father, Joe Jackson, who reportedly criticized his children's physical features openly and systematically. The psychological imprint of that criticism, delivered during formative years by a figure of total authority, appears to have left consequences that extend across multiple family members. Michael Jackson's transformation became a global conversation. LaToya's followed a parallel trajectory, less discussed, but no less significant in what it reveals about image, identity, and the families that shape both. She did not lose her career. At 68, LaToya Jackson remains active in entertainment, television, public appearances, continued engagement with her audience. But her story represents something this industry rarely examines with honesty: the long, visible cost of growing up in an environment where appearance and worth were never fully separated. Della Reese. Before 9 seasons of Touched by an Angel introduced her to 15 million weekly viewers as Tess, the wise, warm, occasionally sharp-tongued heavenly messenger, Della Reese had already spent 3 decades proving that she did not require a television franchise to command a room. Her 1957 recording career at Jubilee Records began with gospel-inflected material that showcased a voice of unusual power and emotional range. By 1959, Don't You Know had climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, a significant commercial achievement for any artist and a remarkable one for a Black woman in that particular moment of American musical history. Jazz albums followed, R&B recordings, live performances across clubs and concert halls that established her reputation not as a crossover artist chasing multiple markets, but as a vocalist genuinely at home in several traditions simultaneously. In her later years, as her appearance changed visibly, public speculation about cosmetic procedures arrived with the reliable predictability of seasons. What was actually shaping her physical presentation was type 2 diabetes and the complex array of cardiovascular complications it produces over time. Conditions that measurably affect facial structure, fluid retention, and overall physical appearance in ways that are frequently, carelessly misattributed to surgical intervention by observers who have no medical context for what they are seeing. She was also ordained as a minister in the Understanding Principles for Better Living Church, a role she took with complete seriousness, using a platform built by decades of entertainment to offer something she considered more lasting than fame. She passed away on November 19, 2017, in Los Angeles at 86. Della Reese spent her final chapter not performing for audiences, but serving them. That distinction matters enormously, and it has nothing to do with plastic surgery. Stephanie Mills. She was 15 years old when she stepped onto the Broadway stage of the Majestic Theater as Dorothy in The Wiz, and delivered a performance that had critics reaching for superlatives they hadn't needed to use before. The 1975 production ran for 1,672 performances. Stephanie Mills won the Theatre World Award. The industry took notice, then watched her translate that stage credibility directly into a recording career that produced some of the most emotionally sophisticated R&B of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Never Knew Love Like This Before, released in 1980 with Teddy Pendergrass, won the Grammy Award for Best R&B Vocal Performance Female. It reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart and number 6 on the Hot 100. I Feel Good All Over, Something in the Way You Make Me Feel, and a string of additional charting singles established her as a consistent, bankable, and genuinely gifted presence across more than a decade of recording. And yet, Stephanie Mills spent much of that career being compared, unfavorably, relentlessly, and with the peculiar cruelty the industry reserves for women, to Diana Ross. In later interviews, she has spoken with remarkable candor about how those comparisons shaped her relationship with her own appearance and her own sense of worth, creating an internal standard she could never fully satisfy regardless of what she achieved externally. Speculation about cosmetic procedures has followed her in recent years. Nothing has been confirmed. Nothing has demonstrably damaged a career still producing music at 70. What her story actually documents is the quieter damage, the kind that leaves no surgical scar, but reshapes how a person sees themselves in a mirror for decades. That cost is real, and it has nothing to do with a procedure. Sylvia Robinson. Two careers, two distinct eras of Black music history, and a singular ability to recognize what the future sounded like before anyone else had the vocabulary to describe it. Sylvia Robinson began as a performer. Her 1973 single Pillow Talk reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B chart. A bold, sensually direct recording that pushed against the boundaries of what radio would accept from a Black female artist, and largely won that argument. It sold over 1 million copies in the United States alone and remains a landmark of its era. But it was her second career that permanently altered the landscape of popular music. As co-founder of Sugar Hill Records, Sylvia Robinson made the decision in 1979 to record a group called the Sugar Hill Gang, performing over a backing track adapted from Chic's Good Times. The result was Rapper's Delight, widely recognized as the first hip-hop recording to achieve mainstream commercial success, reaching number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 4 on the R&B chart, introducing millions of listeners worldwide to a form that would eventually become the most commercially dominant genre in the history of recorded music. She did that. One decision, one session, one vision of what was possible. Rumors about cosmetic enhancements circulated during her later years, with no credible substantiation. What actually shaped her final chapter was illness. She passed away on September 29, 2011, at 75, following a period of declining health. Sylvia Robinson's legacy belongs simultaneously to soul, R&B, and hip-hop. That is not a claim that can be made about many people in the history of American music. Surface-level speculation about her appearance has never come close to touching what she actually built, and never will. Fontella Bass. In the summer of 1965, a woman named Fontella Bass walked into Chess Records in Chicago and recorded a song called Rescue Me. By October, it had reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart. By December, it had climbed to number 4 on the Hot 100. By the following year, it had sold over 1 million copies and become one of the most recognizable soul recordings of the decade. What followed that success was not what the numbers suggested it would be. Fontella Bass received limited financial return from a recording that was subsequently licensed continuously for television commercials, feature films, and sample-based productions spanning 5 decades. The most prominent example involved a major American Express television campaign in the late 1980s that used her recording without her knowledge or consent. She pursued legal action to reclaim compensation she was owed, a process that was costly, protracted, and ultimately partially successful, but that consumed years of her life and energy that should have gone toward music. Her case became a documented example of the systematic financial exploitation that Chess Records and similar labels practiced against Black artists throughout the 1950s and 1960s, signing artists to contracts that transferred ownership of master recordings while offering minimal royalty structures that were routinely undermined even further. When she reappeared in public settings after years of relative withdrawal, some observers speculated about cosmetic changes. No verified evidence supported any of it. She passed away on December 26, 2012, in St. Louis at 72, following complications from a heart attack suffered earlier that year. Fontella Bass's real story is about an artist who created something extraordinary, fought to be compensated for it, and refused to disappear quietly when the industry expected her to. That story deserves to be told accurately, not buried beneath unfounded speculation about her appearance. Phyllis Hyman. Read this one carefully. Because of everything on this list, this is the story the original title does the most damage to, and the one that most urgently requires the full truth. Phyllis Hyman possessed one of the most extraordinary instruments in the recorded history of soul music, a voice existing somewhere between Billie Holiday's emotional rawness and Sarah Vaughan's technical precision, rich, deeply contoured, capable of conveying vulnerability and authority within the same phrase. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, with a physical presence that preceded her into every room, she delivered performances in You Know How to Love Me, Living All Alone, and Old Friend that remain, decades later, genuinely difficult to categorize. There is no documented evidence that plastic surgery played any role in Phyllis Hyman's life. None. What is extensively documented, in interviews, in colleagues' accounts, in her own words, is a years-long battle with bipolar disorder and severe clinical depression at a time when the music industry had no framework for supporting artists in mental health crises and no apparent interest in developing one. Financial instability, professional inconsistency driven by illness, not by lack of talent. Personal isolation compounded by an industry that consumed what she produced and offered nothing when she was struggling. On June 30th, 1995, hours before a scheduled performance at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, Phyllis Hyman died by suicide. She was 45. She left a note describing exhaustion, not from surgery or vanity, but from the accumulated weight of being extraordinary in an industry that never once protected her. Placing her name under a plastic surgery headline is not just inaccurate. It is a continuation of the exact disregard that defined her life. Denise Williams. 4 octaves, verified, documented, and deployed with a level of technical sophistication that made her one of the most distinctive vocal presences in American R&B across 3 consecutive decades. Denise Williams emerged from a background that shaped her music in ways listeners could feel without always being able to name. She had sung in church throughout her childhood in Gary, Indiana, the same city that produced the Jackson Family, and that foundation gave her voice a spiritual depth that coexisted naturally with the pop and R&B material she recorded for Columbia Records beginning in 1976. Free reached number 2 on the Billboard R&B chart in 1976 and introduced her to an audience that recognized immediately it was hearing something unusual. Silly followed in 1981. Then, in 1984, Let's Hear It for the Boy, the theme from the film Footloose, spent 2 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and reached number 1 simultaneously on the Adult Contemporary chart, giving her one of the most commercially significant moments of that musical year. She earned Grammy Awards across multiple categories, including a 1978 Grammy for Best Gospel Performance alongside Johnny Mathis, and a 1987 Grammy for Best Soul Gospel Performance, a breadth of recognition that reflected the genuine range of her artistic identity. As mainstream visibility declined after the mid-1980s and public appearances became less frequent, speculation about cosmetic procedures circulated without any credible supporting evidence. What Denise Williams actually chose was a deliberate, values-driven transition toward gospel music and Christian ministry. Not a retreat from failure, but an alignment with purpose. At 74, she remains active, purposeful, and entirely consistent with the artist she has always been. Her story does not belong under a headline about surgical excess. It belongs in a conversation about artistic integrity. Marlena Shaw. The most honest thing you can say about Marlena Shaw is that she never once tried to be anything other than exactly what she was. And in an industry built on the pressure to conform, that constituted a radical act sustained across 5 decades. She was not a chart domination artist engineered for maximum demographic reach. She was a musician in the original, uncommercialized sense, Someone who moved through jazz, soul, and R&B, not because market research suggested the combination was viable, but because the music itself demanded it. California Soul, recorded in 1969, became one of the most sampled recordings in American music history. Its bass line, its vocal phrasing, and its fundamental energy appearing in productions spanning hip-hop, neo-soul, and contemporary R&B for decades afterward. Producers recognized in that recording something that cannot be manufactured: the specific gravity of a voice that had nothing to prove and everything to express. Woman of the Ghetto demonstrated a social consciousness that predated by years the politically engaged R&B that later defined entire movements. As age narrowed mainstream opportunity, as it does for every artist who lives long enough to watch multiple eras pass, some observers speculated, without evidence, about cosmetic intervention. What changed was not Marlena Shaw. It was the industry's capacity to accommodate anything that refused a convenient commercial label. She continued performing in venues where the relationship between artist and listener remained direct and unmediated. No algorithm required, no brand strategy necessary, just a voice, a room, and 60 years of knowing exactly what she was doing. Marlena Shaw passed away in January 2024 in Sacramento, California at 81. She never chased the spotlight. She simply kept playing with complete integrity on her own terms until the very end. 15 legends, 15 journeys, and one truth that runs through every single story on this list. The real price of fame was never paid in a surgeon's office. It was paid in silence, in pressure, in the slow erosion of being told, year after year, that who you are is not quite enough. Some of these women changed their faces. Some were changed by illness. And some, like Phyllis Hyman, never touched a thing and still lost everything the industry refused to protect. So here is the question we want you to answer in the comments below. Was it really their choice, or did the industry leave them no other option? Drop your thoughts. Tell us which story hit hardest. And if the truth matters to you, subscribe to Hidden Celebrity Stories, because every legend deserves more than a headline.